After a lifetime of researching the dynamic and enigmatic world of light entertainment, I've decided to ditch my notebook and meet the people who inspire me. What makes them the people they are? How do they feel about the show business landscape in which they find themselves? And in a world where anyone can be a star, is there still a need for performers who have universal appeal? Come with me on a journey of discovery as I get a unique insight into Britain's favourite stars with a little help from my glamorous assistants. Yeah, well, I say glamorous, more like hazardous. And of course, we'll have a bit of fun along the way.
In a career spanning 3 decades, writer, actor, broadcaster and comedian Phill Jupitus has become a familiar face on our television screens, appearing on everything from BBC Two's seminal music panel show Never Mind the Buzzcocks to presiding over the BBC's Glastonbury coverage. Jupitus can also boast being the first ever voice heard on BBC Six Music when the station launched in 2002. This was followed by a successful stint replacing Michael Ball as Edna Turnblad in the West End production of Hairspray to rave reviews, and made the edgy comic into a theatrical star. I caught up with Phill on set of the most southern leg of his nationwide tour to talk comedy, radio and life on the road. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Phill Jupitus.
The first time I sort of remember being aware of you on television was on the comedy panel show Gag Tag.
Oh, man, yeah.
What are your memories of working with the great Bob Monkhouse?
The thing about Bob Monkhouse, when I worked with him on Gag Tag, it's really weird. The first time we met, it was there's a very weird thing with Monkhouse in that he knew material that I hadn't really been doing for long. He came up to me and he went, "Oh, there's a bit you're doing at the minute about minicab drivers on the moon that's really, really good." And it's maybe 2 months old. And I'm like, it's not. He's not been going to the Banana in Ballamouth. And Monkhouse just knew everybody who was connected with comedy. And there were people that used to go to gigs and kind of report back to him. He was extraordinary. He was a very, very clever at always keeping himself up to date. What Bob did was he had 3 writers, right? So he had Jez, who was young and one of Jonathan Ross's writers. Colin, who is an old... Colin used to write for Whoopee Comic.
Yeah, we know Colin quite well. He's a friend.
Yeah. And John Junkin.
Yep.
And so Bob used those 3 writers, and they would give him stuff, and he would take stuff. So Junkin was very sort of traditional end of the pier, like musical. Colin was just a really solid gag writer. Colin was just like he was like sort of the engine room, and then Jez was the up to date hip stuff, and Bob would take those 3 different kind of lots of stuff, and he could somehow blend them, and using that crazy mind of his, put his own spin on it. So what I learned from Monkhouse was that there's no shame in using writers for a stand-up to do it. I personally don't do it because I don't know why. I've got some sort of block. I just can't. I have to do all my own stuff. But Bob used writers really creatively, but through their input, he developed his own very singular voice. He was brilliant. And incredibly encouraging of young comedians. One of Bob's favourite comics was the guy, I don't know if you know, do you know Kevin McCarthy? Who used to be the man with a beard, he was known as. And McCarthy was probably Bob's favourite comic on the circuit, but Kev was very linear and just told very straight sort of jokes. So, yeah, I was just completely stunned by how sort of scholarly Bob was about the world of comedy, but just how much he knew about what people were up to at the minute. And also there were comics out there, he said the thing about comedians is they're always sort of, their worst enemy is themselves. They're always held back by their own kind of limited horizons. And he always, Bob said that another one of Bob's favourites, and he said should have his own TV show and should be absolutely huge, was Billy Pearce. Monkhouse loved Billy Pearce, but Billy had a comfort zone he was happy in, and he never wanted to go out of that. And so, yeah. So Bob was a bit like, I don't know, really. I was always incredibly fond of him. If I ever saw he was in a building, I'd always track him down. It was a very sad day when we lost Bob. But yeah, great. A great bloke, really, proper. And I tell you, who has very much sort of picked up his mantle is Jimmy Carr now, and Jimmy is writing about comedy, and Jimmy pretty much knows as much about, in the same sort of areas. Jimmy very much knows what your gag's like, what your style is like, and he's got a very, very kind of academic approach to comedy, in that he knows a lot. He's written books about it, so yeah. Good lad.
So Gag Tag was your first regular appointment of a panel show. That's obviously something now you've become synonymous with throughout your career. Why do you think you're so connected with that type of show?
I think the panel shows, why I sit well on them, I think it's because the more that you do of them, the more you understand the grammar of how a panel show works, and you're always learning about them. And the thing is, it took me... Here's the thing, it took me a while to learn this. I reckon it wasn't for a good 8 years that I realised that going on the panel shows, it is not about what you do. It's not about trying to get jokes in. Actually, those panel shows, it is about listening to what every single person on the panel is saying. You just listen to them, and then it has a much more natural feel. And so... I think that what you're doing is it's almost the best panel shows. Always, it's like an ensemble piece. So an initial idea will come from someone on the panel, and then I will amplify or twist what they have said. So you'll blow it up. So, and then maybe Bill Bailey will be on, and Bill will take it even further. What I've done in the blowing up of it. So it's a bit like how when you see comedy writers in a room and they write together, it's like a sort of, the best panel games are almost like an ensemble thing where everyone is sort of resonating with each other. That's when they work really well. And what always, to me, kind of slows a panel game down when you're on it is someone who thinks, anyone that thinks, I must do jokes, I must get jokes in, if they're too obviously just thinking about how they're going to sound when the edit happens, that's it. Forget that. Completely forget that. You've actually got to shut everything down and just listen to what other people are saying. There's been times on QI, and QI is the one that really makes me nervous. When I sit there, 20 minutes can go by and I've not said anything in the recordings, and that always gets tightened up in the edit. And I say to people when they come on the show, when they're very first on the show, I said the thing is just listen to what's being said, and you'll think of something to say. And the thing is not only will you think of something to say, if you've been quiet for a bit, Sandy will always go to a guest that's been quiet, and will draw them into the conversation. That's the thing about when John Lloyd sort of came up with QI, that he wanted that vibe of, like, when you go out for a meal with mates and you're all sat around and you're sort of, shooting the breeze with each other. It's a less pressured kind of way for comedy to emerge organically. And so I think that because I used to like chatting with funny people, I always used to dig. And I always used to do it with my mates when I was a kid. And when I was a teenager, we used to go out and we used to go to gigs, and just all the, the mucking around with each other that would happen in the train on the way home. That sort of, that social playing around and having a laugh with a gang of people, it's always been one of my favourite things, and so those shows are a method of turning that into a form of entertainment. Yeah.
And then in 1997, you united with comic talents Mark Lamar and the late Sean Hughes for the popular music panel show Never Mind the Buzzcocks. What were your first impressions of the show?
Well, I made all the mistakes I've just told you not to do. I tried to be funny. I used to write stuff for it. I used to really, really, try too hard, and I didn't listen to people because I was just waiting for a gap in the people talking just to get the joke in. So what you're thinking about is your joke and how you can get it in, and you're not listening to the other people. So the first few years on Buzzcocks, I had awful, dreadful, and then you kind of, once you realise that it's a less is more thing, stop trying so hard. Just kind of enjoy the people you're with, and enjoy the evening, and kind of just listen to what's going on. It was it was fun to kind of discover through the show. What I liked was that going and doing QI, which was a lot less confrontational. So Buzzcocks was a bit feisty, it had to be said. But QI was much more relaxed. And I basically brought my QI, once I brought my QI energy to Buzzcocks, that was a lot more fun. It was certainly, the early days, it was, it's very exciting to be on a show that blew up so big so quickly. It became very popular. And it lasted for 18 years. So it was, it was a great, I'm very fond of Buzzcocks, and I had a lot of fun doing it in its various iterations, and I'm quite proud of the fact that I managed to make 280 shows. That one show that I didn't make will eat away at me for the rest of my life. That one show that Frankie Boyle was me for the night, poor Frankie. I'll never forget that.
So, Never Mind the Buzzcocks wasn't the only panel show that you became invested in. 2000, you teamed up with Jonathan Ross and Julian Clary for It's Only TV, But I Like It. That was a very funny show, but why do you think it didn't last for any longer than 4 series?
It's difficult to say, really. It was I think the BBC One panel shows, I'm not entirely sure why they didn't, really, because they had Have I Got News For You was on BBC One and is still there. And things like Would I Lie to You these days are doing quite well. And It's Only TV, But I Like It. I enjoyed doing the 2 series that I did of it were fun, but it was. I'm not sure why. I never. When a show got cancelled, my thing is with television is it's such a transient medium. And I'm fully aware that when new people come in and start running TV companies, there's shows that they just don't like. That they just, I don't want that. But for no reason, it could rate really, really. I mean, Buzzcocks, numbers-wise, was doing perfectly well at BBC Two. And they'd just been hemorrhaging viewers with the new Top Gear. The new Top Gear first series just died on its arse. And so there we were, needing to... There was BBC Two, and it got rid of Buzzcocks as well, which was a regular 1.5 million viewers. And that's, for BBC Two, that's big numbers. And so, It's Only TV, I don't know why it went. I never asked why it went. I just think that that's just the nature of television. The thing is, I'm surprised Buzzcocks lasted for 18 years, really surprised. I'm not joking. Once we'd done sort of 3-4 years, I genuinely kept thinking, this will be cancelled. Any minute now. We'll get the phone call and it will be gone, So that's the kind of... That was my sort of operating mindset, was at the end of every series of Buzzcocks from basically 2001 onwards, I thought, well, that was fun, but that'll be that. That won't be coming back. And I never found out. So bear in mind, we used to record them September, October, November, sometimes into December. So we do September, October, November, we do Buzzcocks. And I wouldn't find out until May that I'd be doing Buzzcocks in September. So I'd finish it in December, and then I'd have December, January, February, March. I'd have 6 months every year where I didn't know if I'd have a job in the autumn or not, which was a bit weird. So I used to try and work quite hard on my off time. And I did like it when other things came along, like It's Only TV, all the other things that came along, and QI and stuff like that. I did QI quite a bit in the early series, and then they realised that actually the show sort of functioned better if they got a much more diverse panel. So I used to do 4 or 5 QIs in the early series. I got quite lucky. Used to do quite a few in a series, and then they kind of pared that back a bit. So generally, I'll do 2 a series. Yeah.
So let's talk about radio for a minute.
Yeah.
What sort of accolade is it to know that you were the first ever voice to be heard on BBC Six Music?
It's one of those. Being the first voice on a radio station, it's one of those things where you just. Oh, you remember that you were that guy who was there who did that, and that's what it was. You were just you happened to be the guy in the room at the time. It was. I think it was just. It was a laugh, and certainly the passion of the people that put Six Music together. Was really quite sort of infectious, and the fact that for 2 years they were working on this thing at the BBC basically in a cupboard in the basement. They were putting together this thing that went under the name of Network Y, and they were trying to come up with a kind of hybrid sort of the music policy of the London station GLR, what they often don't talk about when they talk about Six Music is that GLR had a really much more kind of alternative music policy daytime to either Radio 1 or Radio 2. And so it was this weird middle ground. And all the people in London would say, oh, we really love GLR because it plays such mad stuff during the day. Really stuff you're not expecting to hear. Much more indie, slightly off-kilter vintage stuff. It was great. But and then they kind of took that template and said, well, we could do a national station. And when they realised that with the digital explosion, they'd have new stations. And so you got BBC 7, which became 4 Extra, of course, which was doing all the old archive comedy and Radio 4 stuff. Asian Network, 5 Live Sports Extra, which sort of had the Test match on all the day. 6, and it was kind of interesting to be at an organisation that was so sort of set in its ways, but seeing it kind of exploring new avenues and new ways of doing things. The shame of it, of course, was that they didn't have a way of calculating the listeners to Six Music we didn't get accurate audience figures for 4 years. 4 years. So I was on Six Music for 4 years before we got accurate audience figures. And then when we did get them, I thought they seemed a bit low. They said, yeah, we've got 150,000 listeners. And I'm like, no, we've got more than that. I said, we've got online listeners. They know, no, we can't count online. That's not like what? We can't count online listeners. And all of the listeners that I was interacting with on the show for 4 years listened online. There were a few people that had DAB radios, but the DAB radios. Here's the thing: was we started on a format. So we started with this show on a technical format that you couldn't buy in the shops. You couldn't get the digital radios. Pure were knocking them out as quick as they could. And then after about a year on Six Music, Argos started selling digital radios. So I went to Argos in Southend. I bought 10 and was giving them to mates. They were £99 a pop. And I bought 10 of these radios. My mum got one, dad got one, my brother, my sister, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, they got one. And I gave these things out. And yeah, it was just... it was just kind of weird, but a great. I mean, I love my time on Six Music, working with everyone that worked on the show, especially Phil Wilding and Joe Tyler, who kind of produced me in those early days. And yeah, it was exciting. It was exciting, but jobs come, jobs go. I left rather than I left before. I kind of got the feeling that they were going to ask me to leave, and I left before they got the chance.
So, 2009, you secured the part of Edna Turnblad, replacing Michael Ball for the West End version of Hairspray. What was it about the role that made it so appealing?
The story of how I got Hairspray. Hairspray had been running for a while and was quite successful. And obviously, they were thinking about at some point they were going to have to get a new cast in. And Mel Smith was playing. The late Mel Smith was playing Wilbur. Was it Wilbur? Turnblad, her husband, Edna's husband. And I got originally asked if I would like to be the husband, to be Wilbur. When Mel Smith left, would I like to come in and be Wilbur Turnblad? And so I went to rehearsals and kind of worked up a couple of songs, and then went into the audition for it. And I did the audition. And my agent phoned me up and said, they said they really enjoyed what you did, and they thought it was really good, but they think you're not quite right for Wilbur. And I'm like, oh, well, never mind, these things, it would have been nice to kind of do it. And she went, but how do you feel about playing Edna? And I remember when I watched it the first time, I was watching Mel Smith with a view to playing Wilbur, but I kept looking at Michael Ball going, that looks like a laugh. That looks like a right laugh. Dressing up as a big lady. For money, Josh. For money. Dressing up as a woman in London for money was something I never envisioned having to do, but here I was. And yeah, and I did it, and it was by miles the scariest gig I've ever had. I mean, I've done lots of things, you know. Touring with Madness was quite, you know, touring with the Blockheads, singing with the Bonzos. But yeah, that. Going on stage, the opening night in Hairspray, I think, is the most terrified I've ever been before I went on stage.
One of your proudest achievements as well.
Weirdly, yeah. I mean, if I'm going to say my three sort of proudest moments, and they're odd and they're quite, you know, weird, but it would be definitely singing for the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, doing Hairspray for 3 months in the West End, and there was a kids' TV show that didn't really do a lot of business called Bottom Knocker Street, which was on ITV, which I was in about 30 episodes of. And it didn't get recommissioned, but I enjoyed doing that, I think, more than any other job I've done. I was playing a mad mayor of a town called Councillor Cowdrey, who hated kids, and I was arguing with kids every week. And it was just, I don't know, it was just this, I just kind of was sticking gags in for the grown-ups and for my mates in this show because they didn't have time to film again, and so it was a colossal exercise in misbehaviour. But my mates that have seen it said, why don't you do more of that? That was really good. But, you know, had my chance, and it's nice. The weird thing is with the career and looking back on it, I've done loads and loads of great things once. So I did a sitcom once, I did a kids' TV series once, I was in a film once, you know, and it's that'll do for me. You know, I had to go at things I've always wondered what it'd be like. You know, I did a pilot hosting a panel game once. That I did not like. I quite like being out on the edges. I think I can't drive a panel game. You have to behave yourself too much. It's not in my wheelhouse. No, not doable. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much. We'll let you get on with some
nice one.
Important bits now.
No. This is important too, man. Thank you so much for your time. Cheers.
A big thank you to our guest for being the subject of another Beyond the Title interview. If you like this, why not browse the website and see if there's anything else that takes your fancy. Don't forget to like our Facebook page to receive updates of forthcoming interviews and to see more information about me and what I do. Thanks again, and hopefully see you next time for another Beyond the Title interview.